Duncan runs an online platform called Can You Hear Me, where he shares every single detailed information about his favorite music artist Tucker Crow. Tucker started writing songs in his teenage years and achieved moderate success with his first album titled Juliet, an album inspired by the relationship he had with a girl of the same name. The album was released in 1993, and in the same year, Tucker played his final show at the Pit Club in Minneapolis. He was last seen exiting the men's bathroom of the club, and he abruptly canceled his remaining shows of the tour. Tucker has never been seen again, but his die-hard fans are still present. Annie, who is in a relationship with Duncan, is running her dad's old local history museum. She used to study at London University, but had to return back home when her dad got ill. She first met Duncan 15 years ago and fell in love with him instantly, although that love seemed to have disappeared. Duncan gives lectures on American cinema at a college, and before he got obsessed with Tucker's life, he used to enjoy Annie's presence. Both of them used to talk about movies, music, and books for hours, but that doesn't seem to be the case anymore. Duncan, along with his 200 online friends, always gather together and present various theories on Tucker's music and what he would be doing right now if he's still out there. Rose, Annie's sister, arrives for dinner with her girlfriend at Annie's house. At the dinner table, Rose explains how she met her girlfriend. Upon asking if Duncan and Annie have children, Duncan says that both of them decided that they would not be bringing any children into this world. Annie, however, has been having second thoughts about Duncan's statement, but she refuses to share them. When asked about Tucker, Duncan shows Rose's girlfriend his basement, where he has kept all of Tucker's collectibles, including posters and articles about him on the wall. Duncan is always ecstatic to talk about Tucker with anyone. While she is working at the museum and preparing for an exhibition that would be held soon, Annie finds an extremely old picture of a family she plans to put at the exhibition. Annie can't help but think about what could have happened to the family in the picture. After giving a lecture in college, a woman named Gina wants to ask Duncan some questions about his lecture. Duncan is initially hesitant to answer, but when he learns that the woman is actually a new professor in the college, who has been sitting in different classes to get familiar with the teaching style, Duncan agrees happily to answer any question. Annie returns home and finds a mail on the doorstep. Before she could open up the mail, Annie decides to heat up some leftovers on the stove. One mail is particularly for Duncan, which is actually an unreleased demo recording of Tucker's album Juliet. The name of the demo recording is Juliet, Naked. Annie finds her new dress, which she ordered online, in the mail too. After trying out her new dress, Annie decides to listen to the demo recording, as she has nothing else to do at the moment. Meanwhile, Duncan is having a long chat and coffee with Gina. As Annie has forgotten that the stove is still on, the leftovers get burned and the fire alarm goes off. Duncan returns home and can't fully comprehend what's actually going on. He hears music going on in their bedroom, and Annie panics as she has opened Duncan's mail and listened to Tucker's music before him. She rushes to the bedroom before him so that she can turn off the music before he could find out. Upon hearing a few lyrics, Duncan can't guess if it's Tucker's music or someone else's. Annie explains that Duncan got a mail that contained the unreleased demos from Tucker's album Juliet. Duncan is a bit upset that Annie listened to it first. Duncan puts himself in the right mood and listens to the album in his own way. He is moved by Tucker's unreleased recordings. Duncan returns home and apologizes to Annie for behaving childishly over music. Annie accepts his apology, but labels Tucker's unreleased recordings dreary. Duncan can't believe what Annie has just said, as he believes the unreleased recordings to be a masterpiece. Annie can't comprehend how unfinished recordings could be better than the actual finished songs. Duncan doesn't approve of Annie's opinion on the whole thing. The next morning, Duncan wakes up to find that the online forum has been loving his review of Juliet, Naked. Annie posts a negative review on the forum, which Duncan disapproves of once again. While she's at the museum, Annie explains to the town mayor that they should be representing the life of normal people at their upcoming exhibition. As the town mayor rants on how that's a bad idea, Annie is shocked to see that she has received an email from Tucker, who has been missing and never heard of ever since his last show. In his email, Tucker writes that Annie has given an honest and perfect review of Juliet, Naked. Annie replies asking if it's the real Tucker that has emailed her. Tucker has been living a poor life and has children with different women. Tucker and his son, Jackson, are waiting for Tucker's daughter, Lizzie, to arrive. In order to tell Annie that it is actually him who is emailing her, Tucker reveals that he doesn't have any unreleased songs stored anywhere, something Duncan and his friends believe, and he hasn't performed ever since his last show. Tucker and Jackson live in a garage that is behind the house of Tucker's ex-girlfriend. She has been kind enough to let Tucker live there along with their son. As Tucker has informed much about himself, he asks Annie to tell him something about herself. Annie only lets Tucker know that she has been preparing for an exhibition, and how her life hasn't been that good in the past many years. Tucker picks Lizzie up from the bus stop, and he is more than nervous to meet his daughter, whom he avoided his whole life. While they are on the road, Lizzie learns that Tucker has two more sons, Jesse and Cooper, other than Jackson, from a different woman named Carrie. Lizzie is also aware that Tucker has another child named Grace with a different woman. Tucker introduces Lizzie to Jackson's mom, and all of them learn that Lizzie is expecting a child of her own, meaning that Tucker is moving to the grandfather stage in his life now. Although at first, Tucker didn't think he was that old, but when he realized that he has wasted much of his life, he came to the conclusion that he is old enough to have grandchildren. Lizzie is expecting her child with her boyfriend, who is a musician like Tucker used to be. Lizzie plans on having her baby in London a week later. Annie writes back to Tucker and says that she has wasted the past 15 years of her life with Duncan and isn't sure what she needs to do next. Jackson asks Tucker more about what it is like to become a father and a grandfather. Tucker emails Annie and says that she may not have wasted 15 years of her life, as she just needs to subtract the time that involved good memories and experiences. In this way, she won't feel too bad about her wasted time and potential. Duncan is still unaware of the conversations that are going on between Tucker and Annie. When Tucker shares his experience in parenting, Annie shares her own experience of parenting, as she raised Rose after the death of their father. Annie shares that the love she had for Duncan at the start of their relationship was immense, but now their relationship feels predictable and irritating to her. Duncan was against the idea of having children, but Annie has wanted to have children for some time now. Tucker feels sorry for Annie, as it can be hard living without children. Tucker drops Lizzie at the bus stop for her return back home. He apologizes to her for being a terrible father and not owning up to his past unforgivable mistakes. He wishes that the entire trip could have been more fun for Lizzie. Lizzie also hands Tucker the phone number of his other daughter, Grace. Gina has been reading Duncan's blogs about Tucker. She wants to know more about him, which excites Duncan as he always yearned for the right person, with whom he could talk about Tucker for hours. Duncan invites Gina and both of them hear some of Tucker's songs. While both of them are in the moment, Duncan goes ahead and kisses Gina. Not wanting to live with the guilt, Duncan decides to tell Annie everything. Annie is surprised to hear this and asks Duncan how long he has been with Gina. Duncan says that it was just a one-time thing and something that won't ever happen again. Duncan says that he didn't want to betray Annie, which is why he opened up to her about everything. Despite cheating on Annie, Duncan says that he feels better, and Annie would have felt the same if she was in his shoes. Annie claims that she wouldn't have done something like this in the first place. Annie gets more upset, and Duncan realizes there's no going back from here. Annie wants Duncan to leave her home as soon as possible. Duncan gathers most of his stuff, but doesn't take Tucker's posters with him, as it's raining outside, and he doesn't want to get them wet. Duncan bids Annie farewell, but Annie doesn't want to stay with Duncan, even for a second anymore. Annie tells Rose at a bar that she broke up with Duncan and has been seeing someone. Rose believes that Annie might have been on a dating website, but is perplexed to hear that Annie has been emailing Duncan's idol Tucker. Rose can't fully comprehend the situation, as most people believe that Tucker has remained covert ever since his last show. A drunk Annie proceeds to dance with another man, who has been asking her to dance for quite some time. Tucker emails Annie and tells her that Lizzie's child has arrived 5 weeks early, and he is going to London with Jackson. He invites Annie for a drink, if she finds it okay. Annie, who has been wanting to meet Tucker for a very long time, emails that she would love to, and congratulates him on becoming a grandfather. As they arrive in London, Tucker doesn't feel that well. Jackson asks his father if he's okay. As they enter the hospital, where Lizzie is admitted, Tucker falls and passes out. Annie goes to the decided restaurant and waits for Tucker. Almost the entire day passes, and Annie can't seem to find Tucker or receive any email to intimate her whether he would be coming or not. A highly disappointed Annie decides to go back home. Just when she is about to leave, Tucker calls Annie and informs her that he suffered from a heart attack. The attack was mild, but strong enough to put him in the hospital. Annie wants to visit Tucker as soon as possible, and Tucker shares with her the address of the hospital. Annie arrives and meets Tucker for the very first time. Both of them are shy and can't find the right words to talk to each other. Annie gives Tucker a book to read during this tough time. Jackson meets Annie as well, and both of them decide to go for lunch. While eating, Jackson asks Annie if it's normal to have heart attacks after a flight. Tucker meets Lizzie and her boyfriend, and asks Lizzie if she's okay. Tucker introduces Lizzie to Annie. Tucker tells Lizzie all about how he met Annie online. Lizzie is a bit surprised to hear all of this, as she starts to think that her father might have come to London to meet Annie, rather than being present during the birth of her child. Before Annie could leave, Tucker's other sons, Jesse and Cooper, arrive. Their mother, Carrie, and stepfather also arrive. Lizzie's mother and her husband arrive too. Lizzie also invited Grace, but she didn't respond. Tucker asks Lizzie why she has invited everyone, to which she replies that all of them thought that Tucker was about to die because of the heart attack. Soon, a huge argument breaks out, where Lizzie says that Tucker didn't come to London to meet her child. Rather, he came to see Annie. Annie assures Lizzie that Tucker actually came to see Lizzie's newborn child, and that her meeting with Tucker was nothing more than a coincidence. Annie decides to leave, as everything has turned into a mess. She receives a call from Tucker soon, and he asks her to stay for one more day, so that they could catch up in the morning. Not knowing where to stay and how to spend time together, Tucker suggests that he and Jackson should head to Annie's house, so all of them can go see Annie's exhibition. Annie agrees with Tucker's idea. Jackson and Tucker spend most of their travel sleeping. When they reach Annie's home, Tucker decides to give himself a little tour around Annie's house. He heads to the basement, where he finds Duncan's posters of him on the wall. Annie doesn't want Tucker to have a wrong impression of her. She tells Tucker about Duncan, and how he idolized Tucker his whole life. Tucker jokes that Annie did all of this just to invite him over, but Annie says that it was actually Tucker who came up with the idea of coming to her house. Annie calls Duncan, and wants him to meet Tucker, but Duncan doesn't respond to her properly. Duncan and Gina are on a walk on the beach, and Duncan finds out that Annie is on the beach as well. Duncan doesn't want to meet Annie, but he can't ignore her, as he has made eye contact with her. Duncan asks Annie how she has been doing, and Annie can't wait for him to meet Tucker. When Tucker arrives, he meets Duncan for the very first time. Annie tells Duncan that he is actually meeting Tucker. Duncan doesn't recognize Tucker, and gets angry over Annie for acting immaturely. He leaves the beach a bit upset over Annie's action. Duncan tells Gina everything, and he still can't believe Annie could do something like this. Duncan and many Tucker fans believe that Tucker never had a son. Gina asks if the man actually resembles Tucker. Upon looking at one of his earliest pictures, Duncan starts to think if the man he met was really Tucker. Annie asks questions regarding Grace from Tucker, who doesn't want to answer any of them. Tucker notices that Duncan is spying on him from outside of the house. Annie goes to meet Duncan, and asks if he would like to come in. Duncan asks for solid proof of Tucker's identity, and Tucker shows him his passport. Duncan has now realized that he is standing in front of his idol. Tucker invites Duncan for dinner. Duncan lets Tucker know that he admires Tucker's work so much. Tucker tells Duncan that much of Duncan's and his friends' theories about him and his work were completely illogical and wrong. A friendly conversation soon turns into a heated argument, where Tucker states that much of his work wasn't that good, which Duncan really admired and considered a piece of art. A sad Duncan leaves after saying that Tucker doesn't value his talent, but his music means so much to Duncan. He also adds that art is never made for the artist, but for those that don't possess much talent. The next day, a depressed Tucker tells Annie that when he played his last show, he went to the men's bathroom, and after some time Julie arrived and handed him his daughter Grace. Julie left with the excuse of forgetting her stuff, but she never returned. As Tucker was still very young back then, he panicked and left Grace near the water sink. Tucker says that he couldn't find the strength of finishing up the show, which is why he left as soon as possible. Tucker says that when Jackson was born, he saw it as his last chance in life. Tucker calls Grace and has no words to say to the daughter he abandoned. Grace lets Tucker know that she doesn't want to do anything with him, and that she never wants to get involved in Tucker's life. Tucker sadly agrees to Grace's request. The exhibition has begun, and Tucker really enjoys what Annie has been working on. Tucker is introduced to the town mayor. Annie suggests that she and Tucker should take their relationship to another level. Later, Tucker is invited on stage to sing a song. He is introduced as a mega star by the town mayor, which he definitely isn't. Tucker sings a different song instead of his own. Later that night, Annie and Tucker decide to get romantic with each other, but an ill Jackson interrupts them. Knowing that Jackson has to be with his mother and Tucker can't start a new chapter with her, Annie decides that Tucker should return home and be with his children. Tucker, who was thinking of starting a relationship with Annie, agrees to Annie's request. Tucker returns home and finds that Lizzie's boyfriend has abandoned her and her child. Tucker thinks that it's best for him to be with his children from now on. A few days later at the bar, Duncan meets Annie, and he wants to get back with her. He also agrees to have children with her, but Annie has seen way too much now to get back with him. 1 year later, Annie has moved to London, where she has got a good job at a gallery. She has remained in contact with Tucker as well. Annie plans on having a child of her own, and she is about to go for a cup of coffee with Tucker. Tucker has finally come out of the shadows, and has released new music, which Duncan negatively reviews.